Alright, so it's time to change a couple things on the transmission. Now this is a V-730 automatic Allison transmission. It's a conversion from the original 4-speed non-synchronized transmission that was in the bus. And it requires a lot of work to put it in here. If you can see here, the oil pan is notched out so that it'll fit in around the support there for the cradle that the engine sits in, and the support is also notched out at the top. I don't know if you can see that up there. That's notched out also. Anyway, so it's time to change oil in the transmission, and we'll change the filter that is up there in the corner hanging down. And the real reason for doing this, aside from the fact that the oil needs to be changed, is that the modulator needs to be changed. That's supposed to be changed with every oil change every 50,000 miles, I think the book says. And my neutral switch has been leaking, which is driving me crazy. So we're going to address that with a new neutral switch and a new modulator. We've drained out the oil, 7 gallons, and we ran the bus around a little bit to warm up the transmission, so the oil had been drained out. I've been letting it drip all night, and so it kind of made a mess there. But anyway, we'll clean that up, and then we'll change the filter and put oil in the canister there, put it back together, and hopefully everything will work the way it's supposed to. This will give you a better view of how the transmission is fitted in here. When you don't use there's an adapter plate that you can put on between the engine and transmission that adds about 3 inches. But the problem with that is that it puts the output shaft out of alignment with the the input for the rear axle. And so it moves the hub here, where the universal joints connect to the transmission, way over to the left 3 inches, and then it causes you to have to cut out more of this bulkhead. And I wouldn't recommend that on a 4106. It's designed to be in a 4905 at a different angle. Anyway, so because there's more room in a 4905. Anyway, so this is as you can see, the oil pan notched out, and also the top bolt and top edge of this bracket that holds the cradle mount on the end of the bulkhead here, the engine bulkhead. So that gets notched out. You lose one bolt, you notch out the transmission oil pan, and that's basically how it fits in here. You also have to cut the opening on the other side of the bulkhead there and make it larger. I'll try to show that to you, and add a steel plate for reinforcement. So that's how this modification is made. So to try to give you a view of this, you cut out the rear engine bulkhead and make it bigger for the transmission to fit in, and then you add that 1/4-inch steel plate, goes all the way down to the bottom of the bulkhead and attaches to the bolt on the L bracket or T bracket, T-bar that goes all the way across the bottom of the bulkhead. So here's the oil pan to the engine, and there is the plate at the bottom of the bulkhead. You can see it below the green part of the cradle, and the plate ends 3 bolts from the right and goes over to where the hanger is for the cradle that supports the engine. And all that gets bolted together to maintain the integrity of the bulkhead, with the added weight of that transmission. It weighs about twice what the 4-speed does. And it also keeps all of that stuff from cracking under stress. So this is what the new modulator looks like. It's actually manufactured by Williams Controls, which manufactures the air accelerator pedal and the air throttle that are on the back. You tee off of that and you run a line from the supply line from the throttle to the control, and they're supposed to be equal distance or thereabouts between the line that goes to the T to this and the line that goes from the T to the throttle on the engine. And so we're pretty close to that. And then this is the neutral switch, and it comes not with this, because I bought the plug here. Well, I can't unplug it with one hand here, but anyway, I bought this little connector because it comes with this 2-wire connector, and so this was the right size. It's actually for a trailer hitch or something. Anyway, so I'm going to splice this in there. Interestingly, what was going on, which I think is kind of weird, is the oil is feeding back through the wire and dripping out where it's spliced together up there. So I didn't want to disconnect these ends on here because I thought perhaps, you know, they're oil tight. I don't know. Anyway, so rather than do that, I got this connector. We're going to splice the connector in, and then I won't have to cut the wires on the actual sending unit. One thing to look for when you take the oil plug off is that the end here is a magnet, and you can see just a little tiny bit of metal shavings on there, and so that's good. If it was full of metal, you'd be worried. Alright, so to get this out, you remove this, after you remove the line, you might think you have to turn this to get it out, but you don't really. You take this fork off that holds it in there, like that. See, that's what holds it in there. And then you can just wiggle it and pull it out. And that's all there is to it. Now there's an O-ring in there, right there. You can see they give you a new O-ring, so take that with you, clean it out, and put the new one in. Sorry I'm hopping around all over the place with the video. I'm bouncing on trying to do this. Anyway, that's how it comes out. Okay, so you can see I don't have it tightened up yet, but I put a little thin coat of transmission fluid right on the O-ring that goes in there, and I haven't slid it in yet, but that'll help it slide in when we tighten it down. Nothing ever is easy in life. You can see that the two fittings are different here, so I'm going to have to change the end of the tube. I got a little bit ahead of myself here, and I forgot to show you how the neutral switch comes out, but look, if you can unscrew a nut off of a bolt and screw it back on, basically that's all it is. So you just unscrew it, and then there's a couple wires. I'm still working on cleaning up the wiring here, and put the new one on. Now the old one's a little harder to get off because it had the wires coming out at an angle, and they would hit the edge of the shifter housing there, and so you kind of had to really force it to come out. I didn't like the way that was designed at all. So this is an improved design. As you can see, the shifter is right next to it, and so I like this a lot better. Oh, and also it has just a crush ring on it, so you have to get it fairly tight to keep it from leaking. There's no O-ring that goes on this, and that does seem to keep it from leaking, but as I said, mine leaked through the unit and up through the wires, so it was sort of a weird way that the oil was coming out of it. So on these old 4106s, the V-730 transmission is an addition, and people put them in all kinds of configurations, and this is where we mounted the oil filter. I have to say that I bought this engine and transmission about 25 years ago all together from a friend of mine who was putting a bigger engine in his 4106 that he had lengthened 5.5 feet and raised 7.5 inches, and he took his 8V71 out and put in a 6V92 and wanted to up his horsepower a little bit. So he was selling this. I bought it from him for $9,000, and that was all because I had an overheat problem due to a bad sensor. So my $9 sensor cost me $9,000 for a new engine and transmission, which was a steal at the time. And he and I put it in together. He had more me helping him than me doing it, but he did a great job. So that was how he has his transmission filter set up. There's all sorts of different arrangements. Our oil cooler for the transmission is right there. And so, you know, he had brackets that he had made for all these things, and you know, everybody does their own thing with this when they start making these modifications. and then the oil filter comes off, and that's what the filter looks like. I'll go into more detail, but it's just a twist off canister and element inside that you change separately. Nothing makes me feel better than to clean things up and to give a fresh coat of paint to the components that I take off of there and make them look good and keep everything else clean. The silver color does help make it easier to find leaks and determine where things are going awry. But of course, the real reason is because I have a Silver Series Detroit diesel. At least there's a series of things painted on it that are silver. So anyway, that's the closest I can come. So I want to tell you my transmission story. Quite a number of years ago, I had the transmission there for a few years, and we were going to Vancouver, and I think it was about a 3,000 or 5,000 mile trip. Anyway, we're running along 80-85 miles an hour, and I had begun to hear this kind of scraping noise. It sounded like it was coming from the generator that's just above the transmission. And so when I came home, I kind of examined the noise a little bit better and decided that it wasn't coming from the generator, it was coming from the transmission. So I pulled the transmission out, took it up to the place in Baltimore, and asked them to take it apart and rebuild it or see if it needed to be rebuilt. Anyway, so they took it apart, and I'm telling you, the thing had just completely come apart inside. There were bearings in there where they were completely gone and completely blued. It's a wonder that we even got back. The main bevel gear in there had two teeth missing on it. And I think what happened was I discovered that when I got back, I took the canister off, and when I looked inside, it was full of metal parts. All of the filter was full of metal parts. The canister had a bunch of metal parts in it. The plug on the bottom had metal parts in it. And what had happened was when I put this filter on, I shoved it up all the way on the collar that it fits on with the O-ring. The O-ring holds it on. And in the process, you can see the bottom is closed off. The bottom dropped off of the bottom of the filter. And so essentially it wasn't doing any filtering at all. And something must have gotten in there, and then one thing led to another, and before you knew it, the whole thing was roached. That was an $8,000 repair job, not counting putting it in and taking it out. So I've learned now that I just put it on gently at the bottom, and then I put the canister on top of it this way. And when I do that, I tighten the canister up, and it pushes up on the bottom as it tightens up, and that holds this on. Now, I don't believe that it should have ever come off, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm not sure, you know, how that works. Anyhow, so now, rather than shoving it all the way up and having there be a ½ or an inch gap in the bottom, I just put it on gently, and the bottom of the canister holds the bottom of the filter on. You know, in the end, you never really know what's going to foil your plans. I sort of think this filter filters from the center up, and so the particles catch on the outside and then come up through the center. So I looked down in there just to make sure it was clean, and I saw this stupid little wire in there. Now, it was part of the manufacturing process. It's just a shaving off of the edge of the end when they cast it and then pressed it, or they pressed it, I guess, and they cut it. And it was stuck in there. And so with a lot of manipulation back and forth, I finally got it to break off and pull it out with a magnet. Now, if that had broken off inside there, I don't know where it would have gone or what it would have done. It's probably too small to get caught in a bearing or whatever, but not taking any chances. And actually, when I look at it, I think that it might be part of this screening material that's on the outside of the filter. That's probably what it is, actually. So anyway, I hope that was worth the trouble. Alright, so I put a little bit of a coating of transmission fluid on here and up here. And the next step is to slide the filter on. Not quite so much, just about there. And we'll put a little bit of oil in the filter. Somewhere along the way, stuck up there. I lost the O-ring. Alright, there's the O-ring. And this is our second try actually, because I forgot to put the oil in the first time. Don't overfill it, just a little bit. Already making a mess. And brand new paint job, boy, I tell you. Nothing like screwing things up. Alright, and then you just slide it up and get it started. Okay, and then you let the canister draw the filter up onto the housing. Which hopefully will keep it from falling off. So, all there is to it. Okay, so we finished doing all of our servicing. We've changed the filter, we've drained the oil, we changed a couple of parts, the neutral switch and the shift modulator, and now we're down to filling it up with oil, and it takes 7 gallons. And it's ATF, heavy duty, multi-purpose ATF. I usually buy castor oil, been using it for years, and it seems to work for me. I usually make 2 holes in the bottle, a bigger one down here and a smaller one up there to let the air in. You cannot go any faster putting it in this tube, and that kind of meters it for you, and then you don't have to pay so much attention about the thing backing up and flooding on you. So go slow, that's the trick.